He called her his everything, then paraded his nothing in front of everyone. This isn't a fairy tale. This is the story of Patricia Chatsworth, a woman who had it all: a penthouse overlooking Central Park, a wardrobe filled with haute couture, and a billionaire husband, Sibylla Pearce, who worshipped the ground she walked on. Or so she thought. At the city's most prestigious charity gala, with the flash of paparazzi cameras lighting up her Dior gown, and the secret of their first child blooming within her, Sibylla shattered their perfect world. He introduced his mistress to society, leaving a pregnant Patricia to crumble in the most public way imaginable. But from those ashes, a new woman would rise. This is the story of how a betrayed wife returned not for revenge, but to build an empire that would make her husband's fortune look like pocket change. Life for Patricia Chatsworth Pearce was a meticulously curated masterpiece. Their home, a sprawling duplex on the 75th floor of 157, wasn't just an apartment, it was a statement. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a god's-eye view of Manhattan, a kingdom over which her husband, Sibylla Pearce, reigned. Sibylla, the CEO of Pearce Global Properties, was a man carved from ambition and granite. He had inherited a respectable real estate firm, and with a ruthless blend of charisma and cunning, transformed it into an international behemoth. Patricia was his perfect counterpart. With a master's degree in art history from the Sorbonne, she possessed a quiet elegance that Sibylla's new money desperately craved. She wasn't just a beautiful accessory. She was the curator of their life, transforming their cold modern spaces into warm, sophisticated homes filled with carefully chosen art. She advised him on acquisitions for the corporate collection and charmed his investors with her intellect and grace. She was in every sense his partner. Their 5th anniversary was approaching, and with it the annual Metropolitan Foundation Gala, the crown jewel of the New York social calendar. This year was different. Patricia held a secret she'd been cherishing for 8 weeks, a secret she planned to reveal to Sibylla in a beautifully wrapped box after the gala, a pair of tiny cashmere booties. She was pregnant. Their child, the true heir to the Pearce empire, was on the way. The evening of the gala, the air in the penthouse buzzed with anticipation. Patricia stood before the mirror, her reflection shimmering in a custom-made navy silk gown by Schiaparelli. The fabric clung to her frame, subtly hinting at the new life she carried. Sibylla entered the dressing room already in his tuxedo. Perfect, Patty. Absolutely perfect, he said, his voice a low hum of approval. He clasped a diamond necklace around her neck, his fingers cool against her skin. The necklace was the Lumière de Cascade, a breathtaking piece from Harry Winston he'd bought at a Sotheby's auction. A queen needs her crown jewels. She smiled, her heart fluttering. It's beautiful, Sibylla. Thank you. He kissed her cheek, a gesture that felt more performative than affectionate. Lately his touches had felt that way, gestures meant for an audience, even when they were alone. There had been late nights at the office, hushed phone calls he'd walk into his study to take, and a new, uncharacteristic scent of a different perfume, a sharp, cloying gardenia that sometimes clung to his suits. She had pushed the thoughts away, blaming her own nascent pregnancy hormones for her unease. Sibylla was a busy man. This was the price of their life. The gala was a chaotic symphony of wealth and power. Camera flashes exploded like fireworks as they stepped from their black Bentley. Patricia smiled, her hand resting protectively over her abdomen, a gesture no one but she understood. Inside the grand hall was a sea of designer gowns and hushed gossip. They held court at their table, a prime spot near the stage, accepting congratulations on a recent skyscraper deal in Dubai. to my brilliant wife, Patricia Sibylla, said, raising his glass of champagne in a toast to their table guests. The soul of our home, and the heart of my life. Patricia's cheeks flushed with pleasure. The doubts that had pricked at her conscience melted away under the warmth of his public adoration. This was her husband. This was their life. The first crack in her perfect world appeared an hour later. Sibylla excused himself to network. Patricia was engaged in a conversation with the elderly Mrs. Rothschild about a new Monet exhibition when a ripple of silence spread from the grand entrance. Heads turned, whispers followed. Standing there, bathed in the archway's light, was a woman who was Patricia's complete opposite. She was sharp angles where Patricia was soft curves, her platinum blonde hair cut in a severe geometric bob. She wore a blood-red Alexander McQueen dress that looked less like a gown and more like beautiful, dangerous armor. Her name was Kendra Lowe, a ruthless up-and-comer in the world of venture capital, known for her aggressive takeovers and even more aggressive social climbing. And walking toward her, his hand outstretched, was Sibylla. Patricia watched a cold knot forming in her stomach as Sibylla took Kendra's hand. He didn't just greet her, he possessed her, his hand sliding from her fingers to the small of her back. He guided her through the crowd, not towards a peripheral group, but directly towards the center of the room, towards their table. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. They stopped a few feet from where Patricia sat, frozen. The world seemed to narrow to this single horrific tableau. Patricia Sibylla's voice was smooth, but his eyes were like chips of ice. I'd like you to meet Kendra Lowe. Kendra is a very important new partner for the company. Kendra's smile was a slash of crimson lipstick. It didn't reach her cold, assessing eyes, which flickered over Patricia's gown, her diamonds, and then with a flicker of triumphant disdain, seemed to linger for a moment on her stomach. It's a pleasure to finally meet the woman behind the man, Kendra said, her voice a purr. The emphasis on behind was a deliberate, poisoned dart. Patricia couldn't speak. The air had been sucked from her lungs. This wasn't a business introduction. The way he held her, the proprietary gleam in his eye, the way the entire room was holding its collective breath, this was a declaration. He hadn't just brought his mistress to the gala. He was presenting her, flaunting her. A well-known society columnist, Brenda Maxwell, sidled up to their table, her pen poised. Sibylla. A bold move. Is Pierce Global Properties expanding into venture capital? Sibylla's smile widened. He pulled Kendra closer. His hand splayed possessively on her hip. Pierce Global is always expanding. We're moving into a new era, a more dynamic future. The subtext was a sledgehammer. Patricia was the past. This woman was the future. The room was spinning. The faces of her friends and acquaintances were a blur of pity shock and morbid curiosity. She could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on her, dissecting her reaction. She felt the delicate life inside her, a secret that was supposed to be a joyous gift, now felt like a lead weight in her womb. She rose from her chair, her legs trembling. Sibylla. She whispered, her voice barely audible. May I have a word with you in private? He looked at her as if she were a stranger, a minor inconvenience. We're a little busy right now, Patricia. Why don't you go get some air? It was the dismissal that broke her. Not the affair, but the casual public cruelty of it. He had taken their life, their marriage, and set it on fire in front of the entire world, and he didn't even have the decency to look her in the eye while it burned. She turned her Schiaparelli gown, feeling like a shroud, and walked away from the table. She didn't run. She walked with a dignity she didn't feel, past the staring faces, past the whispers that followed her like a trail of smoke. Each step was an agony. The flash of a camera went off in her face, and in that blinding white light, she saw her future a ruin. She didn't stop until she reached the cold marble of the ladies' lounge. Leaning against the sink, she stared at her reflection. The diamonds around her neck felt like a slave's collar. Her perfect face was a mask of horror. And as the first sob tore through her, a sharp, cramping pain shot through her abdomen, a terrifying premonition of all the things she was about to lose. The Bentley ride back to the penthouse was a silent, suffocating ordeal. Patricia sat pressed against the far door, the plush leather feeling cold and alien. Sibylla sat beside her, radiating a chilling indifference. He scrolled through his phone, a small triumphant smile playing on his lips as notifications likely poured in about his dramatic social coup. He hadn't just launched a new business partnership. He had launched a new public identity, and he had used his wife's humiliation as the runway. When the car door opened, in the sterile silence of their private garage, Patricia moved on autopilot. She walked into the elevator, her gaze fixed on the polished steel doors, refusing to look at him. The cramping in her belly was a dull, persistent ache, now a drumbeat of dread. Inside the penthouse, the magnificent view of the city skyline seemed to mock her. A kingdom she no longer had a place in. What was that, Sibylla? Her voice was hoarse, stripped of its usual melodic tone. He finally looked up from his phone, his expression one of mild irritation. What was what, Patty? It was business. You're being hysterical. Hysterical. The word, so dismissive, so patronizing, cracked something open inside her. You brought that woman, your mistress, to the most public event of the year. You stood her next to me. You humiliated me in front of every person we know. He shrugged, walking to the bar and pouring himself a whiskey. Kendra is not just a mistress. She's a formidable asset. Her firm is backing our new Tech City project in Austin. It was a strategic announcement. A strategic announcement, she repeated, her voice rising with disbelief. You announced your affair as if it were a quarterly earnings report. Don't be so naive, he sneered, turning to face her, the amber liquid swirling in his glass. This is how the world works. We had become stale, predictable. People respect power, Patty. Boldness. What I did tonight, that was power. It's got everyone talking. The Pierce Global stock will probably jump 5 points tomorrow on the buzz alone. Patricia stared at him, truly seeing the man she had married for the first time. The charming, ambitious man she had fallen in love with was a facade. Beneath it was this, a cold reptilian creature who saw human beings as assets and liabilities. And tonight, she had been reclassified as a liability. And what about me? What about our marriage? She whispered, the fight draining out of her. The marriage served its purpose, he said, with brutal finality. You gave me class. You curated a beautiful life. But I've outgrown it. I need someone who can play in the big leagues, not just pick out curtains and paintings. The insult was designed to gut her, to reduce her entire contribution to their life to domestic fluff. It worked. She felt hollowed out, worthless. And then she remembered the secret she still held. Hope, fragile and desperate, flickered within her. Maybe this would change things. Maybe the reality of a child would pierce through his monstrous ego. Sibylla, I'm pregnant. The words hung in the vast, silent room. He stopped swirling his drink. For a moment, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes, shock, maybe even fear. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by a cold, calculating mask. He took a slow sip of his whiskey. Well, that is inconvenient timing. Inconvenient. Her heart, already shattered, seemed to disintegrate into dust. Their child was an inconvenience. "We'll handle it," he continued, his tone chillingly practical. "My lawyers will draft a generous severance for you. An NDA, of course. We'll set you up in a nice apartment, maybe back in California, near your brother. You can have the baby quietly. A trust will be established. No one needs to know it's mine. It would complicate the narrative with Kendra." He was erasing them. With a few calculated sentences, he was writing her and their unborn child out of his life story. The cramp in her abdomen suddenly intensified, sharp and vicious. She gasped, doubling over and clutching her stomach. A wave of dizziness washed over her. Sibylla. She breathed a new terror, eclipsing everything else. Something's wrong. He looked at her with detached annoyance. "Stop being so dramatic, Patricia. It's a classic move. Don't think some phantom pain is going to make me change my mind. No, you don't understand." She gasped, leaning against a marble column for support. A terrifying warmth was spreading through her. I'm bleeding." He just stared. There was no concern in his eyes, no rush to help. There was only suspicion, as if her physical agony was just another negotiation tactic. That was the moment Patricia Chatsworth Pierce died. In her place, something harder, something colder began to form. She looked at the man she had loved, the father of the child she was now losing, and saw nothing but a monster. With the last of her strength, she pushed herself off the column. "Get out!" she rasped. "This is my house, Patricia. Get out!" Her voice was a low growl, filled with a venom that surprised them both. She ignored the pain, her entire being focused into a laser of pure hatred. "If you are not out of this apartment in 5 minutes, I will call Brenda Maxwell myself and give her a story that will make your strategic announcement look like a fairy tale. I will tell her and every other reporter in this city about the child you're abandoning. Your stock won't jump 5 points. It will plummet 50. For the first time that night, she saw fear in his eyes. Not for her, not for their child, but for his company, for his reputation, the narrative. He set his glass down. "Fine. Have your tantrum. My lawyers will be in touch with yours." He turned and walked out of the penthouse and out of her life without a single backward glance. The moment the door clicked shut, her legs gave out. She collapsed onto the cold marble floor, the world dissolving into a vortex of pain and grief. Her hand came away sticky and red. Her baby. Their baby. Gone. Lost in the wreckage of a life that had been a beautiful lie. Lying there alone in the gilded cage she had built, Patricia Chatsworth didn't just cry. She mourned the death of her child, her husband, and the woman she used to be. The night was not just an ending. It was a brutal, agonizing annihilation. The first few weeks were a blur of grey. Patricia didn't stay in the penthouse. She couldn't. Every polished surface, every piece of art she had so lovingly placed was tainted by Sibylla's betrayal. The moment she was physically able, she packed a single suitcase and fled, leaving behind the diamonds, the couture, and the ghost of her former life. Her brother Leo Chatsworth was her savior. A pragmatic, no-nonsense corporate lawyer based in San Francisco, he flew to New York the moment he heard her broken voice on the phone. He didn't offer platitudes or empty comforts. He offered action. He installed her in a discreet, serviced apartment at the Carlyle, handled the initial venomous communications from Sibylla's legal team, and simply sat with her in the silence, a solid, unwavering presence against the storm. "He's offering a settlement," Patty Leo said one afternoon, looking through a thick legal document. "It's generous, as he puts it. 7 figures an apartment in Tribeca, contingent on a lifelong non-disclosure agreement that's so restrictive you wouldn't be able to tell our own mother his favorite color. Patricia, who had been staring blankly at the rain-streaked window, turned to him. The listlessness that had clouded her eyes for weeks was gone, replaced by a flicker of hard, cold fire. "Tell them to take their offer and burn it," she said, her voice flat. "I don't want his blood money. I don't want anything from him. I want him erased from my life." Leo raised an eyebrow, a slow smile spreading across his face. "There she is," he said softly. "I was wondering when you'd show up." That was the turning point. Grief was a cold, heavy cloak, but beneath it anger was a furnace. The miscarriage had devastated her, carving a permanent hole in her soul, but it had also cauterized the wound of her love for Sibylla. There was nothing left to salvage, nothing left to mourn but the child. The man was dead to her. She refused his settlement. Leo, using his legal prowess, negotiated a simple, clean divorce. Sibylla, eager to clear the way for his new life with Kendra and avoid any public messiness, agreed. Patricia asked for only two things: her maiden name back and a small portfolio of art she had personally acquired before the marriage pieces she'd bought with her own inheritance from their grandmother. It was a pittance to a man like Sibylla, and he signed off on it without a second thought. With the divorce finalized, Patricia Chatsworth sold the art. The pieces, a few minor impressionist sketches, and a promising contemporary sculpture, fetched nearly $500,000. It wasn't billionaire wealth, but it was hers. It was a start. And with that money, she bought a one-way ticket to the only place that had ever felt like her own sanctuary, Paris. She didn't rent a chic apartment in Saint-Germain. She found a small, dusty flat on the top floor of a building in Le Marais, with a leaky skylight and a view of 1,000 crooked rooftops. The city wasn't a playground for her anymore. It was a workshop. She poured her energy not into social events, but into her original passion, art restoration. She remembered a name from her time at the Sorbonne, Antoine Dubois, a legendary art restorer who ran a small, exclusive workshop. He was a purist, an old master who worked with museums and private collectors who valued skill over speed. She called him her French fluent but rusty and asked for a meeting. Dubois' workshop was a cavern of wonders, smelling of linseed oil, turpentine, and old canvas. Canvases in various states of repair leaned against the walls like weary soldiers. Dubois himself was a small man with kind, tired eyes and hands stained with a century of pigments. He listened patiently as Patricia, not as the former Mrs. Pierce, but as a humble art historian, explained her skills and her desire to learn the physical craft of restoration. He was skeptical. "This is not a glamorous hobby, Mademoiselle Chatsworth. It is patient, painstaking work. It is dust and chemicals, and hours spent staring at a single square centimetre of cracked paint." "I'm not looking for glamour, Monsieur Dubois," she replied, her gaze steady. "I'm looking for work." He tested her. He gave her a small, forgotten 18th century portrait, marred by a clumsy Victorian-era varnish that had yellowed and obscured the delicate brushwork beneath. For weeks, Patricia worked in a quiet corner of his studio. She arrived before his other apprentices and left long after they were gone. She immersed herself in the science of solvents, the delicate art of in-painting. The intense microscopic focus required was a balm to her fractured mind. While she meticulously removed the discolored varnish, she felt as if she were also stripping away the layers of her old life, revealing the stronger substance underneath. Her hands, once accustomed to the smooth chill of diamond necklaces, were now chapped and stained. She traded her designer heels for practical flats, and her gala gowns for a simple work smock. and slowly she began to heal. One evening, Dubois stood behind her, watching as she applied a final protective layer to the restored portrait. The subject's face, once hidden behind a yellow fog, now shone with life, the artist's original, vibrant colors resurrected. "You have the touch, mademoiselle," he said, his voice filled with quiet respect. Not just the knowledge, but the patience, the soul of an artist. That praise meant more to her than all of Sibylla's empty compliments about her beauty. It was validation of her skill, of herself. Dubois began giving her more important projects. Her reputation within the small, cloistered world of European art restoration began to grow. She was known for her meticulous research, her delicate hand, and her uncanny ability to understand an artist's original intent. 2 years after her arrival in Paris, Patricia was working on a commission from a Belgian museum when she realized her period was late. A cautious, terrifying hope bloomed in her chest. A visit to a discreet doctor on the Rue de Rivoli confirmed it. She was pregnant. There had been a brief, gentle affair with a kind university professor who saw her for who she was not, who she had been married to. It had ended amicably when he'd taken a post in another country, but he had left her with the one thing she thought she had lost forever. This time there was no billionaire husband, no penthouse, no public announcement. There was only Patricia in her small Parisian flat, with her own hard-earned money and a future she was building with her own 2 hands. She placed a hand on her stomach, and for the first time since that horrible night, she felt a profound, unadulterated joy. This child would not be an heir to a cold empire. This child would be hers, her motivation, her masterpiece. She would name her Rosalind, a name that meant beautiful rose, a flower that could grow and thrive from the rubble. The next 5 years were a whirlwind of quiet, relentless construction. Patricia gave birth to a healthy, beautiful daughter, Rosalind, a child with her mother's thoughtful grey eyes and a spirit of pure sunshine. Motherhood redefined Patricia's ambition. It was no longer fueled by the bitter ashes of revenge, but by the fierce protective fire of a parent's love. She was not just rebuilding a life for herself. She was building a fortress for her daughter. She founded her own company, Chatsworth Restoration. Operating initially out of a larger studio space she leased near the Place des Vosges, she hired 2 of the best apprentices from Dubois' workshop. Antoine Dubois, now semi-retired, acted as her mentor and occasionally consulted on challenging projects, his revered name lending her fledgling company immediate credibility. Chatsworth Restoration became known for a niche expertise, identifying and restoring sleepers' paintings of immense value that had been misattributed or forgotten, hidden under layers of grime and neglect in dusty private collections and provincial auction houses. Patricia combined her academic knowledge with her hands-on skill. She would spend weeks in libraries and archives, tracing the provenance of a piece before ever touching a solvent to its surface. Her breakthrough came in her 3rd year of business. She was contacted by a Spanish family, the de Vegas, whose ancestors had been patrons of the arts. They had a large, dark painting of Venus that had been hanging in a drafty corridor of their ancestral castle for 200 years. It was attributed to a minor student of Velázquez and was considered largely worthless. They wanted it cleaned simply for sentimental reasons. When the painting arrived at her Paris studio, Patricia felt a familiar thrill. The composition was clumsy in parts, but the way the light fell on the subject's skin, the masterful rendering of the velvet drapery, it felt different, important. For 6 months, she and her team worked. They ran pigment analysis, X-rayed the canvas, and spent 1,000 hours on the restoration. As they painstakingly removed the dark, heavy overpainting from a 19th century modesty campaign, they uncovered the original breathtaking brushwork beneath. And in a corner, hidden under a layer of brown paint, they found a faint, looping signature. It wasn't a student's. It was the signature of Artemisia Gentileschi, one of the most celebrated and fiercely independent female artists of the Baroque period. It was a lost masterpiece, the Sleeping Venus of de Vega. The art world erupted. The discovery was the subject of front-page articles in Le Monde, The Times of London, and La Repubblica. When the painting was authenticated and went to auction at Christie's in London, it sold for a staggering $32 million. As part of her contract, Patricia had negotiated a percentage of the sale price as her fee, a common practice for high-stakes restoration discoveries. Overnight, Patricia Chatsworth was not just a respected restorer. She was a millionaire. A self-made millionaire. The story was irresistible. The brilliant art historian, the hidden masterpiece, the woman who had built her own success from nothing. She was featured in Forbes magazine's Europe's 30 Under 30. Even though she was in her early 30s, they made an exception for the compelling narrative. The article mentioned she was American, but barely touched on her past life in New York, framing her as a quintessential Parisian success story. Patricia used the money not for luxuries but for expansion. She diversified, adding art curation and investment consultation to her business services. She became a trusted advisor for a new generation of wealthy tech entrepreneurs and old money families who wanted to build collections with meaning and value. Her company, now rebranded as the Chatsworth Art Group, opened a small chic office in Geneva to handle the financial side of the business. She and Rosalind lived comfortably, but not extravagantly. They had a beautiful apartment on the Île Saint-Louis with a view of the Seine. Rosalind attended a small private bilingual school. Their life was filled with museum visits, picnics in the Jardin du Luxembourg, and the comforting familiar scent of oil paint and old books. Patricia had found more than success. She had found peace. But as her European empire grew, she knew a crucial piece was missing. The heart of the global art market, the city with the wealthiest and most ambitious collectors, was still New York. To truly cement her legacy and take her company to the next level, she had to go back. She had to plant her flag in the very city that had cast her out. The decision was terrifying. It meant returning to the scene of her greatest humiliation. It meant the possibility of running into Sibylla. But looking at her daughter now, a bright, curious 5-year-old Patricia knew she couldn't let fear dictate their future. She wouldn't let Sibylla Pierce have the power to keep her exiled from her own home country. She made the call to a commercial real estate agent in Manhattan. She wasn't looking for a small office. She was looking for a flagship gallery space. A statement. She found the perfect location, a multi-level light-filled building in Soho that had once been an ironworks factory. As the contracts were signed and the plans for the grand opening began, the New York media caught wind of the story. Parisian art prodigy Patricia Chatsworth to open Soho Gallery read a headline in the New York Times style section. The article praised her European success, her famous Gentileschi discovery, and her formidable reputation. It was accompanied by a recent photo of her confident, elegant, and looking directly at the camera with an unreadable, powerful gaze. In his Park Avenue office, Sibylla Pierce read the article, the newspaper rattling in his hand. The photo was of a woman he barely recognized. The soft, accommodating girl he had married was gone. In her place was a formidable stranger, Patricia Chatsworth. He noted with a jolt that she had taken back her maiden name. He scrolled through photos of her, online pictures of her speaking at conferences in Zurich, cutting the ribbon on a museum wing she had helped curate in Amsterdam. Then he saw a photo of her in a park, laughing with a small, dark-haired girl. a girl who would be about 5 years old. A cold, unfamiliar feeling, a mixture of shock, regret, and a strange possessive anger began to twist in his gut. His discarded asset had somehow impossibly become a blue-chip stock. And she was coming back. The return to New York was a meticulously planned invasion. Patricia didn't slip back into the city. She arrived. She purchased a stunning brownstone in the West Village, a world away from the cold glass tower she had once called home. It was a house with character, with a garden for Rosalind to play in, filled with the art and books that defined their life, not a husband's status. The renovation of the Soho Gallery was her primary focus. For 6 months, she was a whirlwind of focused energy. She flew in architects from Italy and lighting designers from Stockholm. The space was transformed into a modern temple of art with soaring ceilings, polished concrete floors and walls of brilliant white. It was named simply Chatsworth. The news of the gallery's impending launch party sent shockwaves through the city's elite. It wasn't just another gallery opening. It was an event. The return of Patricia Chatsworth was a story too juicy to ignore. Whispers swirled in the same circles that had watched her fall apart 5 years ago. They remembered the humiliated wife fleeing the Metropolitan Foundation Gala. Now they were reading about the self-made millionaire, the art world powerhouse who had conquered Europe. The cognitive dissonance was intoxicating. Invitations to the Chatsworth opening became the most coveted social currency of the season. Patricia curated the opening exhibition herself. It was titled Resurgence, a collection of works by contemporary female artists who explored themes of transformation, strength, and the reclamation of narrative. The centerpiece was a magnificent large-scale abstract painting by a celebrated Japanese artist, full of bold, explosive color, breaking free from a dark, fractured background. It was a statement of intent. The night of the opening, Patricia stood on the gallery's mezzanine level, looking down at the arriving crowd. She wore a tailored emerald green jumpsuit by Roland Mouret, powerful, sleek, and utterly modern. Her hair was cut in a chic, shoulder-length style, and her only jewelry was a pair of simple diamond studs. She was not the girl in the Schiaparelli ball gown. She was the woman who owned the building. Her brother Leo was by her side, a proud grin on his face. "You did it, Patty," he said, handing her a glass of champagne. "You really did it." "We did it," she corrected, smiling at him. "I couldn't have survived that first week without you." "Yeah, well, I just held the door. You're the one who built the damn castle." The gallery filled with a glittering mix of artists, collectors, museum curators, and the inevitable society figures, all craning their necks to catch a glimpse of their hostess. Patricia descended the floating steel staircase, moving through the crowd with an easy, confident grace. She greeted people warmly, discussing the art with passion and expertise. She was in her element, in complete control. And then she felt a shift in the room's energy. A familiar, cold dread, the ghost of a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. She looked toward the entrance. Sibylla Pierce and Kendra Lowe had arrived. Sibylla looked much the same, his tailored suit still impeccable, but there were fine lines of stress around his eyes that hadn't been there before. Kendra was draped in a silver sequined dress, her expression a mixture of defiance and curiosity. They were a power couple, but tonight they felt like intruders in someone else's kingdom. Their eyes met across the crowded room. Patricia saw a flicker of shock in Sibylla's gaze, a raw disbelief that the composed, powerful woman before him was the same broken girl he had dismissed 5 years ago. He had expected to see a survivor. He was not prepared for a conqueror. Kendra's smile was tight, her eyes sweeping over the gallery with an appraising, competitive glare. She saw the sheer scale of Patricia's success, the genuine respect she commanded from the city's cultural elite, and the mask of smug superiority slipped for just a moment. Patricia didn't falter. She didn't hide. She ended her conversation with the director of the MoMA and began to walk calmly and deliberately toward them. The crowd seemed to part for her, the ambient chatter dimming as people sensed the impending collision. This was the moment she had both dreaded and, on some level, prepared for. This was the test. She stopped a respectable distance from them, her posture perfect, her expression serene. "Sibylla, Ms. Lowe," she said, her voice cool and even. "Thank you for coming. I hope you enjoy the exhibition." Her use of Ms. Lowe was a subtle but sharp jab. After all these years, they weren't married. The great love affair that had destroyed her marriage hadn't culminated in the ultimate partnership after all. She saw the slight wince in Kendra's expression. Sibylla recovered, first slipping into his old, charming facade. "Patricia, it's incredible. What you've accomplished. We've been following your success. It's truly remarkable." "I've been busy," she replied, a simple statement of fact that held a universe of meaning. "We should talk," he said, lowering his voice slightly. "Catch up. There's a lot to discuss." Patricia gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head. "I don't believe there is, Sibylla. Everything that ever needed to be said between us was said 5 years ago in this city. This gallery this evening, this is a new conversation, and it has nothing to do with you." She held his gaze for a moment longer, letting the finality of her words sink in. There was no anger in her eyes, no pain. There was something far more devastating indifference. She had not only survived him, she had rendered him irrelevant. Without waiting for a reply, she gave them a polite, dismissive nod and turned away, moving deeper into the heart of her gallery, her world. She left them standing at the entrance, 2 ghosts from a past she had fully and finally transcended. The Queen had returned to her city, not to reclaim an old throne, but to unveil a new one built entirely by her own hands. The gallery opening was a triumph. The next morning, Patricia's face was on the cover of every society and arts journal in the city. Chatsworth's resurgence, a triumphant return, was the headline in Women's Wear Daily. The focus was on her business acumen, her artistic eye, and the sheer force of her will. The encounter with Sibylla and Kendra was relegated to a single delicious sentence in Brenda Maxwell's gossip column. Sibylla Pierce and Kendra Lowe made a brief appearance, looking like relics from a bygone era, in the gleaming new world of Patricia Chatsworth. For Sibylla, that sentence was a paper cut that festered into a gaping wound. The world he had so carefully constructed was beginning to crumble. The dynamic future he had promised with Kendra had not materialized as planned. Their aggressive venture capital projects had yielded a few early successes, but several high-risk tech investments had recently collapsed, costing Pierce Global Properties hundreds of millions. His reputation for ruthless genius was being re-evaluated as reckless gambling. The old guard of New York real estate men he had once scorned now whispered that he had lost his touch, distracted by his flashy, high-maintenance partner. His relationship with Kendra was a constant power struggle. The passion had cooled into a transactional partnership. They were bound not by love, but by a shared, desperate need to maintain an image of success. Kendra, who had seen Sibylla as her rocket to the stratosphere, was growing resentful as his trajectory began to plateau. Patricia's return threw their precarious situation into stark relief. She wasn't just a successful ex-wife. She was a symbol of a different kind of power, one built on substance taste and genuine creation, not just leveraged assets and hostile takeovers. She made them look cheap, Driven by a mixture of desperation and a bruised ego, Sibylla began trying to force his way back into her orbit. He started with a massive floral arrangement sent to the gallery, a gaudy explosion of orchids and lilies with a simple card, "Congratulations, let's have dinner." D. Patricia instructed her assistant to donate the flowers to a local hospital and to throw the card in the trash. Next, he tried a professional angle. A formal letter arrived from his legal team proposing a partnership. Pierce Global Properties was developing a new luxury residential tower on the Hudson Yards and wanted to commission the Chatsworth Art Group to curate the building's entire art collection from the lobby to the penthouse suites. It was a multi-million-dollar contract, an offer most firms would have killed for. Patricia read the proposal in her office, a calm, sunlit room overlooking the gallery floor. She recognized the strategy immediately. It wasn't about the art. It was about associating his brand with hers. It was about him buying back a piece of the credibility he had lost. It was about control. She dictated a polite but firm refusal to her assistant. The Chatsworth Art Group's current project schedule does not allow for any new large-scale commissions at this time. We wish Pierce Global Properties the best in their search for a suitable partner. The message was clear. She didn't need his money or his projects. His attempts grew more personal, more desperate. One afternoon, while Patricia and Rosalind were getting ice cream at a small shop near their home in the West Village, Sibylla happened to be walking by. "Patty fancy seeing you here," he said, his smile forced. Patricia's body went rigid. She instinctively put a protective arm around Rosalind, who was focused on her chocolate fudge scoop. "Sibylla," she said, her voice devoid of warmth. His eyes fell on Rosalind. He stared at the little girl, at her dark hair and serious grey eyes, her eyes. A complex emotion flickered across his face, curiosity, regret, and something that looked disturbingly like ownership. "This must be," he started, his voice softening. "This must be Rosalind." "Her name is Rosalind." "Yes," Patricia said, her tone a clear warning. "And we're just leaving." "She's beautiful, Patty," he said, his gaze fixed on the child. She has your eyes." He was trying to build a bridge to create a connection where none existed. He had forfeited the right to this child, to this life 5 years ago on a cold marble floor. "My daughter and I have a class to get to," Patricia said, her voice like steel. She took Rosalind's hand, dropped a $20 bill on the counter without waiting for change, and guided her daughter out of the shop, walking past Sibylla as if he were a lamppost. She didn't look back, but she could feel his eyes on them, a burning, possessive gaze that made her skin crawl. That night she called Leo. "He's not giving up, Leo." He approached Rosalind. "That son of a bitch," Leo swore. "Don't worry, I'll handle it. I'll send his lawyers a letter so clear it will singe their eyebrows. He has no parental rights. He signed them away. One more unsolicited approach, and we'll file for a restraining order." The legal threat worked for a time, but Sibylla's desperation was reaching a tipping point. And then Patricia discovered a secret that would give her the ultimate, final checkmate. She was in the process of acquiring a small private art collection from the estate of a recently deceased hedge fund manager. As part of her due diligence, she was going through the provenance records for each piece. One painting in particular, a beautiful landscape from the Hudson River School, caught her eye. As she traced its ownership history back through the decades, she saw a familiar name. The painting had been sold in the late 1990s from the estate of Alistair Pierce, Sibylla's grandfather. Her curiosity piqued. She started cross-referencing other pieces from the collection. She spent a week digging through auction records and private sales archives. A shocking picture began to emerge. The hedge fund manager had acquired nearly a dozen significant pieces that were once the core of the original Pierce family collection. This was the old money art, the foundation of the family's cultural legacy. She remembered Sibylla bragging about how his grandfather had been a great collector. Why would these pieces be sold off? She made a call to a trusted contact, an older art dealer who knew all the city's secrets. The dealer's story was damning. "Oh, the Pierce collection," he'd said with a sigh. "A tragedy. Young Sibylla sold it all off about 10-15 years ago. He needed liquidity for some high-risk commercial real estate venture in Asia. He gutted his family's legacy for a quick cash infusion. He thought paintings on a wall were dead money. Most of it was bought up by a hedge funder, a fellow named Peterson. A much smarter collector in the long run." Patricia hung up the phone, her mind reeling. Sibylla hadn't just built an empire. He had done it by secretly selling off its foundation. His entire persona was a lie built on a legacy he himself had dismantled and sold for parts. And the crowning irony, the centerpiece of her own acclaimed discovery, the Gentileschi masterpiece, the sleeping Venus of de Vega, she now realized with a jolt of ice-cold clarity that she had outbid that very same hedge fund manager, Peterson, to acquire it for her Spanish clients. She had unknowingly prevented the greatest piece of all from falling into the hands of the man who held the rest of Sibylla's family legacy. She now held all the cards. This wasn't just about personal betrayal anymore. This was about his entire identity. And she knew exactly how she was going to play her hand. The endgame was not a dramatic confrontation in a boardroom or a shouting match in a public place. Patricia's final move was one of quiet, devastating precision, executed on her own terms in her own space. She orchestrated it through Leo. He sent a single formal letter to Sibylla's legal team. The letter stated that Ms. Patricia Chatsworth was in possession of information regarding the sale of the Alistair Pierce collection and was prepared to make this information available to key financial reporters and business biographers. It also stated that she had a final proposal to discuss with Mr. Pierce and that he was to meet her at her gallery alone at 9 o'clock the following evening. Sibylla arrived at the appointed time, stepping into the silent, beautifully lit gallery. The space, empty of its usual throng, felt like a cathedral. Patricia was waiting for him in the main exhibition hall, standing before the explosive, vibrant painting that was the centerpiece of her Resurgence collection. She was dressed simply in black trousers and a silk blouse, her hands in her pockets. She looked completely at ease, a queen in her court. "Sibylla," she said, not turning to look at him. "Thank you for coming. Your lawyer's letter was compelling," he said, his voice tight with barely concealed rage. "What is this, Patricia? Blackmail? Blackmail is such an ugly word," she said, finally turning to face him. Her expression was calm, almost placid. "I prefer to think of it as a final acquisition. I'm simply acquiring the last thing I need from you, your permanent absence from my life and my daughter's." She gestured to a small table where a stack of folders lay. "I know about the collection. Sibylla, your grandfather's collection. I know you sold it off piece by piece to fund your first big gamble. You sold your heritage to build a house of cards. How do you think your investors, the ones who bought into the Pierce family legacy, will feel when they learn that the legacy is a hollowed-out shell? He paled. She had him, and they both knew it. His entire brand was built on a foundation of generational wealth and stability. The revelation that he was just another gambler who'd cashed in his family jewels would shatter that image and likely trigger a crisis of confidence in his already struggling company. "What do you want?" he finally rasped. "It's very simple," she said, walking toward him, her steps echoing on the polished floor. You are going to sign a legally binding document which my brother has already drafted. It will reinforce the fact that you have no paternal claim to Rosalind now or ever. It will include a strict proximity clause stating that you will not come within 500 feet of her, her school, or our home. You will cease all contact, direct or indirect. You will effectively cease to exist in our world. And in return, he asked, his jaw clenched. In return, she said, stopping just a few feet from him, the provenance records of your grandfather's collection remain my private research. I have no interest in ruining you, Sibylla. I have no interest in you at all. Your success or failure is completely irrelevant to me. I just want you gone. He stared at her, a maelstrom of emotions warring in his eyes, fury, humiliation, and a dawning, horrified respect. He had created this woman. His cruelty, his betrayal had been the crucible that had forged this unbreakable, brilliant adversary. He had discarded her, and in doing so, had engineered his own defeat. And what about Kendra? He sneered, a last pathetic attempt to wound her. I suppose you'll enjoy watching her leave me when the money finally runs out. Patricia almost smiled. Honestly, Sibylla, I haven't thought about Kendra Lowe in 5 years. Your relationships are your own business. They have nothing to do with me. It was the final, perfect cut. She felt nothing for them. Not jealousy, not hatred. Nothing. They were a footnote in a book she had long since finished reading. He stood there for a long moment, defeated. The fight was gone. There was nothing left but the bitter taste of ashes. He walked to the table, picked up the pen, and signed the documents without reading them. He knew Leo's work would be ironclad. He placed the pen down and turned to leave. At the door, he paused and looked back at her, a ghost in the beautiful world she had built. Was it worth it, Patricia? He asked, his voice hollow. All this. She looked around her magnificent gallery at the powerful art that lined the walls and thought of her daughter sleeping safely in their beautiful home. She thought of her work, her purpose, her peace. It was worth everything, she said. And then she turned her back on him, returning her gaze to the art, leaving him to walk out into the night alone. The news broke 6 months later. Pierce Global Properties, over-leveraged and unable to secure new financing, was forced into a massive restructuring. Sibylla Pierce was ousted as CEO. Kendra Lowe, true to his prediction, had left him weeks before her social media suddenly filled with pictures of her on a yacht with an aging tech billionaire. Sibylla stripped of his power, and his wealth faded into obscurity. Patricia read the news on her iPad one morning while having breakfast with Rosalind. She felt a brief, distant flicker of something, not triumph, not pity, but closure. She closed the article, put her tablet aside, and went back to helping her daughter decide whether her teddy bear wanted to wear a crown or a pirate hat to their tea party. Her empire wasn't built of glass and steel, it was built of love, resilience, and beautiful things. And it was just beginning. That is the incredible story of Patricia Chatsworth. It's a story that proves that the greatest revenge isn't loud and destructive, but quiet, brilliant, and constructive. She didn't set out to destroy the man who broke her. She set out to build a world so magnificent that he no longer had a place in it. Her journey from a heartbroken wife to a self-made millionaire is a powerful testament to the strength that can be forged in the fires of betrayal. It's a reminder that our greatest creations can often rise from our deepest pain. If you were inspired by Patricia's story of resilience and empowerment, show your support by hitting that like button. Share this story with someone who needs to hear that it's possible to rebuild stronger than ever before. And for more stories of incredible transformations and inspiring journeys, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories like this to light. Thank you for listening. He stood in the center of New York's most exclusive restaurant, a symbol of power and success, holding a diamond ring that glittered with the fire of 1,000 captured stars. He was about to place it on the finger of his mistress, a public declaration of his new life, his new love. The crowd was captivated, their phones recording the audacious spectacle. But what he didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that the woman who had just walked in, the wife he had so casually discarded, wasn't just there to witness her humiliation. She was there to collect her property, because she didn't just own the ring, she owned the entire multi-billion-dollar brand that created it. This isn't just a story of infidelity. It's the story of a queen taking back her kingdom, one carat at a time. The low hum of contented wealth filled the cavernous space of La Lanterne d'Or. Crystal glasses chimed with the sound of celebratory toasts, and the murmur of discreet conversation wove itself into the soft melodies drifting from a grand piano tucked away in a velvet-draped alcove. This was Jonathan Davenport's natural habitat. He thrived in these environments, places where a man's worth could be measured by the cut of his suit, the vintage of his wine, and the beauty of the woman on his arm. Tonight, he was a king surveying his court, and the woman on his arm was Penelope Vance. Penelope was a masterpiece of modern ambition. Her blonde hair was styled into an impossibly sleek cascade that fell over the bare skin of her back, exposed by a shimmering emerald gown that clung to her every curve. She was 28, 2 decades younger than Jonathan, and she looked at him with an intoxicating blend of awe and adoration that he had long ceased to see in his wife's eyes. He sipped his Chateau Margaux, the dark liquid a perfect complement to the smug satisfaction warming his chest. "Are you nervous, darling?" Penelope whispered, her fingers tracing the lapel of his Tom Ford suit. Jonathan chuckled, a deep, confident sound. "Nervous? Penelope, I've orchestrated multi-billion-dollar mergers. This is a pleasure." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. "This is for us. A public statement. No more hiding in the shadows. The world needs to see who the real man of the hour is, and who his leading lady will be." Her eyes, the color of a summer sky, widened with a carefully practiced innocence. "Oh, Jonathan, you're too much." But she didn't mean it. She loved that he was too much. His extravagance was her validation. Every expensive gift, every exclusive reservation was another brick in the foundation of the life she was meticulously building for herself, a life far removed from her middle-class upbringing in Ohio. Across town, in a brightly lit studio in the meatpacking district that smelled of metal polish and focused creativity, Catherine Reyes was oblivious to the drama about to unfold. Her dark hair was pulled back into a simple, elegant knot, and a pair of artisan's goggles were pushed up onto her forehead. Her hands, graceful but strong, moved with a familiar certainty over a wax model of a new earring design. This was her sanctuary, the heart of Reyes Jewels, the company her father, the legendary Hector Reyes, had founded, and she had built into a global empire. Reyes Jewels wasn't just another luxury brand, it was an institution. Each piece told a story, infused with a soul that mass-produced jewelry could never replicate. Catherine was the keeper of that soul, while Jonathan, her husband of 19 years, handled the aggressive business strategies and public relations as CEO. She was the architect, the artist, the very essence of the brand. Her phone buzzed on the workbench, and she glanced at the screen. Samantha Jones, her head of operations and closest friend. She swiped to answer, placing it on speaker. "Burning the midnight oil again, Cat." Sam's voice was warm but laced with its usual no-nonsense tone. "Just refining the Persephone collection. The clasp on the locket isn't right. It feels weak," Catherine replied, her eyes not leaving the delicate piece in her hands. "You're the only person on earth who would lose sleep over the tensile strength of a locket clasp," Sam said with a laugh. There was a pause. "Hey, speaking of things that aren't right, I was going over the quarterly expense reports for the executive accounts." Catherine sighed, finally setting the model down. "Sam, please tell me this isn't another lecture about Jonathan's entertainment budget. I wish it were that simple. It's not the dinners at Oriole or the fleet of town cars. There's a charge here from our own flagship store, a significant one. It was coded as a promotional acquisition, but it was processed through his private executive account. A single item." A knot of unease tightened in Catherine's stomach. She had been feeling it for months, a persistent, low-grade dread she tried to push away. The late nights Jonathan attributed to investor calls, the faint, unfamiliar scent of perfume on his clothes, the emotional chasm that had opened between them, vast and silent. She had chosen to believe his excuses, to immerse herself in her work because the alternative was too painful to contemplate. "How significant?" Catherine asked, her voice quiet. "Star of Serenity significant," Sam replied, naming one of their most exclusive high-carat bespoke pieces, a flawless 15-carat blue diamond set in a platinum band intricately woven with smaller, brilliant-cut stones. It was a masterpiece of design and rarity. Catherine's breath caught in her throat. She knew that piece intimately. She had overseen its creation from the initial sketch to the final polish. That piece was commissioned for the vault. It's not for sale. Well, apparently it is now. Or it was. Jonathan authorized the transfer himself 3 days ago. "The paperwork is all here, signed and sealed," Sam said, the concern in her voice deepening. "Cat, what's going on?" Catherine sank onto her stool, the scent of metal polish suddenly cloying, the weak clasp, the late nights, the emotional distance, and now this, a secret, extravagant purchase of one of her own creations. The pieces of the puzzle were clicking into place, forming a picture she didn't want to see. "He told me he had a big charity gala tonight," Catherine said, her voice barely a whisper. "At La Lanterne d'Or." A heavy silence hung between them. Sam didn't need to say anything more. They both knew. The charity wasn't a cause. It was a woman. The gala wasn't an event. It was a stage. Back at the restaurant, Jonathan signaled the waiter. The moment had arrived. The lights in the dining room dimmed slightly, a prearranged cue. A hush fell over the tables as diners sensed a spectacle was imminent. Penelope's heart hammered against her ribs. "Penelope," Jonathan began, his voice resonating with theatrical gravity. "For too long, I have been living a life of obligation, a life in black and white. You brought the color back. You have shown me what true passion, true partnership can be." He reached into his jacket pocket and retrieved a small velvet box. It was a deep navy blue, the signature color of Rhea's jewels. Penelope gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. This was it, the culmination of all her efforts, the ultimate prize. Jonathan's eyes gleamed with triumph as he opened the box. Nestled inside, the Star of Serenity diamond drank the light of the room and threw it back in a dazzling, fiery explosion of blue and white brilliance. It was more magnificent than she could have ever imagined. With the entire restaurant watching, with dozens of phones held aloft recording his every move, Jonathan Davenport slid off his chair and knelt on one knee before his mistress. "Penelope Vance," he declared, his voice booming in the quiet room. "Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" 19 years ago, Jonathan Davenport had been different. Or maybe, Catherine often thought, he had been the same man. But she had been a different woman, one who saw him through a filter of youthful optimism and shared dreams. They had met at a gallery opening in Soho. He was a junior investment banker then, sharp and ambitious, with a smile that could disarm a hostile boardroom. She was the quiet, intense daughter of the great Hector Reyes, more comfortable at a jeweler's bench than at a cocktail party. He had been fascinated by her world. He didn't just see the sparkle of the finished gems, he saw the fire, the pressure, the meticulous art that transformed a rough stone into a thing of beauty. He would sit for hours in her father's workshop, asking intelligent questions, his eyes alight with genuine curiosity. He hadn't just courted her. He had courted her craft. He saw the potential in Rhea's jewels long before she did. "Your father is a master artist, Kat," he'd told her one evening, his hand covering hers over a table cluttered with sketches. "But this is more than a workshop. It's a legacy. It's a brand. It could be the biggest name in haute joaillerie, bigger than Cartier, bigger than Van Cleef and Arpels." She had been swept away by his vision, his energy. Her father was a purist, content with his bespoke clientele and his sterling reputation. Jonathan saw a global empire. When they married, he brought his business acumen to her artistic heritage. At first, it was a perfect partnership. After Hector Reyes passed away from a sudden heart attack 5 years into their marriage, Catherine was devastated, lost in a sea of grief. Jonathan stepped in, a pillar of strength. He took the reins of the business side, assuming the title of CEO, allowing her to grieve and to focus on what she did best: design. "You are the soul of this company, my love," he had assured her. "Let me be the shield. I'll handle the boring stuff, the supply chains, the marketing budgets, the expansion plans. You just create. Create the beauty only you can." And so she had. Under their dual leadership, Rhea's jewels exploded. They opened flagships in Paris, London, and Tokyo. Their pieces adorned royalty and Hollywood A-listers. Jonathan became a celebrated figure in the business world, lauded for his Midas touch, his aggressive and brilliant strategies that had turned a respected family business into a billion-dollar powerhouse. But slowly, subtly, the narrative began to shift. In interviews, our vision became my strategy. Catherine's design became the product my creative team developed. He was the face of the company, the charismatic rainmaker. She, by her own preference for privacy, became the reclusive genius, the name on the box who was rarely seen. The emotional distance between them grew in direct proportion to the company's stock price. The man who once sat mesmerized in her workshop now barely glanced at her sketches. His late nights, once spent with her poring over designs, were now spent at business dinners she was never invited to. The shared passion that had been the bedrock of their relationship was gone, replaced by a polite, professional courtesy. They were partners in business, but strangers in life. Their sprawling penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, once a warm home filled with laughter and collaborative energy, had become a gilded cage. It was a showroom for their success, impeccably decorated, yet cold and silent. Catherine found her solace not there, but in the controlled, creative chaos of her private studio. Her work was the one thing that was still truly hers, a direct connection to her father and to the woman she used to be. The rhythmic scrape of a file against metal, the precise click of a setting tool. These were the sounds of her real life. She had tried to ignore the warning signs, burying her hurt and loneliness in the intricate details of a new collection. When a friend had mentioned seeing Jonathan laughing intimately with a young blonde at a polo match in the Hamptons, Catherine had dismissed it as a business meeting. When she found a receipt for a lavish dinner for two at a restaurant she'd never been to, she'd accepted his flimsy excuse about entertaining a client. To acknowledge the truth would be to admit that the entire edifice of her life was a lie. It was easier to believe in the illusion than to face the shattering reality. But the purchase of the Star of Serenity was different. It wasn't just an extravagant expense. It was a violation. That diamond was more than just a stone. It was a symbol, a piece of her family's history. Her father had acquired the raw 50-carat diamond years ago, calling it his someday stone. He believed a gem of that magnitude and unique color had to wait for the perfect design, the perfect moment. After he died, the stone sat in the master vault, a silent, blue-flamed tribute to his legacy. 2 years ago, for their anniversary, Catherine had finally felt ready to honor it. She had designed the Star of Serenity, setting herself, a deeply personal project. The intricate platinum weave was meant to represent their two lives intertwining, the smaller brilliant-cut diamonds the highlights of their journey together. It was a testament, she had believed, to a love that, though strained, was enduring. She had shown the designs to Jonathan, and he had been uncharacteristically moved. "It's magnificent, Cat." "Truly," he had said, his voice thick with an emotion she now realized was entirely fraudulent. "Let's keep it safe, for a special occasion. For us." Now, he was taking that symbol of us and using it as a prop in a tawdry public spectacle. He wasn't just cheating on her. He was desecrating her father's memory and perverting her own art. He was using the very soul of her life's work to destroy her. The hurt was a physical thing, a white-hot blade twisting in her gut. But as she sat there in the silence of her studio, the pain began to cool, solidifying into something else. It was no longer the fragile grief of a betrayed wife. It was the cold, hard fury of a queen whose castle was under siege. She stood up, her movements calm and deliberate. She walked over to a full-length mirror and looked at her reflection. She saw the smudge of graphite on her cheek and the fatigue in her eyes. This was not the image of a victim. This was the creator, the architect, the true owner of the Reyes legacy. Jonathan had made a fatal miscalculation. He had mistaken her quiet nature for weakness. He had forgotten that the same hands that could shape delicate filigree could also crush stone. "Sam," she said, her voice devoid of its earlier tremor, now imbued with an icy resolve. "Get the car. We're going to a gala." "What are you going to do?" Sam asked, a hint of awe in her voice. "He wants to make a public statement," Catherine replied, pulling the goggles from her hair and letting it fall around her shoulders. "I'm going to give him one." La Lanterne d'Or was not merely a restaurant, it was a theatre, and its proprietor, Pierre, was a master of stagecraft. The lighting was an intimate, honeyed gold. The tables were spaced far enough apart for secrets to be whispered, but close enough for grand gestures to be witnessed by all. Tonight, the main performance was at Table 12, center stage. The occasion was the annual Gems of the City fundraiser, a black tie event benefiting youth arts programs, a cause Jonathan Davenport championed with loud, public donations that bought him priceless social capital. It was the perfect backdrop for his personal drama. Penelope felt like she was floating. The champagne, the admiring glances from other tables, the weight of Jonathan's hand on the small of her back. It was all intoxicating. She saw her reflection in the polished surface of a silver wine chiller and smiled. This was the woman she was meant to be, confident, desired, dripping in luxury. The woman who had won. She knew Jonathan was married. He had painted a bleak picture of a cold, passionless relationship with a woman who was, in his words, married to her work. He had described Catherine as a recluse, a fragile artist who had retreated from the world after her father's death, leaving him to run their empire alone. Penelope felt a flicker of pity for the poor woman, but it was quickly extinguished by her own soaring ambition. Jonathan tapped his glass with a fork, and the gentle chime silenced the room. He rose, a broad, confident smile on his face. The diners, a mix of New York's financial elite and old-money philanthropists, turned their attention to him. He was a popular figure, known for his charm and his company's spectacular success. "Friends, colleagues," he began, his voice smooth and commanding. "Thank you all for being here tonight to support such a worthy cause. We are here to celebrate art, to nurture the creative spark in the next generation. And in that spirit, I find myself moved to celebrate a more personal work of art." He turned his gaze to Penelope, and her breath hitched. This was more than she had expected. "For a long time," he continued, his voice taking on a confessional tone, "my life was governed by duty, by legacy. I helped build an empire of beautiful things, but my own world felt hollow. And then I met someone who is herself a masterpiece. Someone who reminded me that the most precious gems are not the ones we pull from the earth, but the ones we are lucky enough to find in people. Passion, vitality, and a love for life." A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. This was far more personal than the usual corporate benefactor speech. Across the room, the venerable Mr. Bartholomew, a titan of the luxury goods industry and an old friend of Catherine's father, watched with a deeply furrowed brow, his expression unreadable. Jonathan's hand dipped into his pocket. "And so tonight, as we celebrate new beginnings for the young artists of our city, I want to mark a new beginning for myself." He produced the navy velvet box. A collective gasp went through the room. Penelope felt a dizzying rush of triumph. He was doing it here, in front of everyone. It was a power move, a definitive severing of his past, and a bold claiming of his future with her. He opened the box. The star of serenity ignited under the soft lights. Its blue fire was hypnotic, otherworldly. It was the most beautiful thing Penelope had ever seen. The sheer size and brilliance of it sent another shockwave through the audience. This was not just a ring. It was a statement of unimaginable wealth and intent. This was a queen's ransom. With practiced grace, Jonathan lowered himself to one knee. The flashes of camera phones, previously discreet, now became a strobe-lit frenzy. The moment was being captured, broadcast, immortalized. "Penelope Vance," he proclaimed, his voice ringing with the sincerity of a seasoned performer. "You have shown me what it means to truly live. Will you make me the happiest man in the world? Will you be my wife?" Tears welled in Penelope's eyes, tears of genuine, overwhelming joy. This was her coronation. She opened her mouth to say the single word that would seal her destiny, the word she had been dreaming of for months. "Yes," she began to breathe out, a soft, eager sound. But the word was swallowed by another voice. A voice that was not loud, but carried with such clarity and authority that it sliced through the captivated silence of the room like a shard of diamond. "That's a beautiful piece, Jonathan. I'm glad you appreciate my work." Every head in the restaurant turned towards the grand entrance. Standing there, framed by the ornate archway, was Catherine Reyes. She was not what the room expected. Jonathan's descriptions had painted a picture of a mousy, withdrawn woman, a ghost haunting a workshop. The woman who stood before them was anything but. She wore a simple, impeccably tailored black dress that fell to her ankles. It was unadorned, save for a single, breathtaking piece of jewelry, a necklace of her own design, a cascade of white diamonds and sapphires that coiled around her neck like a celestial serpent. Her dark hair was styled in a sleek chignon, and her face, though pale, was a mask of serene composure. She did not look angry or hysterical. She looked like she owned the room. In truth, she owned the very brand that was at the center of the spectacle. Behind her, a step to her left, stood Samantha Jones. In a sharp pantsuit, with a tablet clutched in one hand and an expression of grim satisfaction on her face, Sam looked less like a guest and more like an executioner's aide. Jonathan froze, still on one knee, the ring held aloft. The blood drained from his face, replaced by a mottled, purplish hue of pure shock. It was as if he was seeing an apparition. This was impossible. Catherine never came to these events. She hated the schmoozing, the flash bulbs, the superficiality of it all. She was supposed to be in her studio, safely out of sight, oblivious. Penelope stared, her mind struggling to process the scene. Who was this woman? Her poise, her elegance, the way the entire room's energy had shifted to orbit around her. It sent a prickle of fear up Penelope's spine. She glanced at Jonathan's horrified face, and a sliver of doubt, cold and sharp, pierced her triumphant haze. Catherine's eyes, a deep, intelligent brown, swept the room once, acknowledging the audience, before settling on the tableau at table 12. She began to walk forward, her heels clicking with a soft, rhythmic cadence on the marble floor. It was not the hurried, frantic pace of a woman wronged. It was the deliberate, unhurried stride of a predator approaching its cornered prey. The whispers started, low and urgent. That's Catherine Reyes. Hector Reyes's daughter. Jonathan's wife. The last word hung in the air, charged and damning. Catherine reached the table. She didn't look at Jonathan. Her gaze fell upon the ring glittering in the box, and then lifted to meet Penelope's confused and fearful eyes. Catherine's expression was not one of anger, but of something far more unnerving. A clinical, almost pitiful assessment. "He didn't tell you, did he?" Catherine's voice was calm, conversational, yet it carried an edge of steel. "About who I am, or about that ring." Penelope could only shake her head, her fairy tale moment crumbling into a nightmare. Jonathan scrambled to his feet, his face a mess of confusion and burgeoning rage. "Catherine, what in God's name are you doing here?" he hissed, trying to keep his voice low, to contain the escalating disaster. "You're making a scene. This is a private matter." Catherine finally turned her gaze to him. The look in her eyes was one he had never seen before. The warmth, the tolerance, the quiet forbearance. It was all gone. In its place was a chilling clarity, the dispassionate focus of a master jeweler inspecting a flawed stone. "A private matter?" she repeated, her voice still level, but now laced with a potent irony. "You got down on one knee in a room full of people, with cameras flashing, to propose to your mistress using a ring I designed for our 20th wedding anniversary. You made this public, Jonathan. I'm just here to add a little context." The word mistress landed like a physical blow. Penelope flinched, her face flushing with a deep, painful scarlet. The whispers in the room grew louder, more fevered. Mr. Bartholomew, at his corner table, leaned forward, his expression now one of intense, grim fascination. Sam stepped forward slightly, positioning herself to the side, her phone now in her hand, discreetly recording. Not for social media, but for evidence. Catherine had planned every move. This was not a crime of passion. It was a calculated, strategic demolition. The architect had arrived, and she was about to show everyone the fatal flaws in the foundation of the life her husband had built. Jonathan, regaining a sliver of his bravado, tried to seize control. "Catherine, you're being hysterical. You're overwrought. Let's go home and discuss this." He reached for her arm, a gesture of command disguised as concern. Catherine moved her arm away with a motion so fluid and final, it was as if he had touched air. "Don't," she said, the single word sharp enough to make him recoil. "We have nothing to discuss at home. Everything that needs to be said will be said right here." She turned her attention back to Penelope, who looked as if she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. Catherine's voice softened, but not with sympathy, with the detached tone of a professor explaining a complex but tragic theorem. "That ring," she began, gesturing towards the box Jonathan still clutched in his trembling hand, "is called the Star of Serenity. The central stone is a 15.2-carat, fancy, vivid blue diamond, internally flawless. My father acquired the rough stone in Botswana over 30 years ago. He never cut it because he was waiting for the right inspiration." She paused, letting the history of the stone sink in. This was not just a product off a shelf. It was a legacy. "I designed that setting myself. Every detail has a meaning. Do you see the interwoven platinum bands?" She looked at Penelope, forcing the younger woman to meet her gaze. They were meant to represent two separate lives twisting together to become stronger. The 19 smaller diamonds embedded along the band, one for each year of our marriage. The hidden sapphire on the inside of the band is my birthstone. I designed it as an anniversary gift. For my husband. From me. Each sentence was a perfectly aimed blow, dismantling Penelope's fantasy piece by piece. The ring on which she had pinned all her hopes was not a symbol of her future, but an artifact of a marriage she had helped destroy. It was a stolen heirloom. Penelope looked from the ring to Jonathan, her eyes wide with accusation. "You told me you had it commissioned for me," she whispered, her voice cracking. Jonathan sputtered. "I did. Catherine, you're twisting things. This is a malicious lie." "A lie?" Catherine's voice sharpened. "Sam!" Sam stepped forward, holding her tablet. On the screen was a crystal-clear image of Catherine's original, hand-drawn design sketches for the Star of Serenity. They were dated, signed K. Reyes, and watermarked. "The original design schematics, dated 2 years ago," Sam announced crisply, "along with the GIA certification for the stone, which lists the Reyes family trust as the original owner." Catherine continued, her focus now lasered onto Jonathan. "And as for how you commissioned it, let's talk about that. You didn't buy this ring, Jonathan. You stole it." "That's slander," he snarled, his face contorting with rage. "Is it?" Catherine's calm was terrifying. "You used your executive discretionary fund to authorize a promotional transfer of the ring from the master vault to your possession. The transaction, number 7274B1, was processed at 4:15 p.m. 3 days ago. The stated purpose was for a showcase at a potential investor event. You forged the acquisition request, bypassing the standard multi-signature protocol required for any item valued over $1 million. You know the protocol because you wrote it." The level of detail was staggering. This wasn't an emotional outburst, it was an indictment. She was laying out a case for grand larceny in the middle of a 5-star restaurant. "The value of that ring is not what you paid, because you paid nothing. Its appraised insurance value is $28.5 million, or," Catherine stated, her voice resonating in the dead silent room. "You took a corporate asset, a piece of my family's history, and attempted to gift it to your mistress as a personal item. That's not just infidelity, Jonathan. That's embezzlement. That's fraud." Penelope let out a small, choked sob. Her dream had curdled into a sordid, criminal conspiracy. She looked at the diamond, and it no longer looked beautiful. It looked like evidence. It felt heavy, tainted, a millstone that could drag her down with him. Jonathan was cornered. His bluster had evaporated, leaving behind the raw panic of a man whose carefully constructed world was imploding in real time. He looked around the room, at the faces of his peers, his investors, his friends. He saw no support, only shock, disgust, and the cold, unforgiving judgment of his social and financial equals. Mr. Bartholomew was slowly shaking his head, a look of profound disappointment on his aged face. "You," Jonathan stammered, pointing a shaking finger at Catherine. "You will regret this. I built this company while you were hiding in your workshop." A humorless smile touched Catherine's lips. "That is the biggest lie of all," she said, her voice dropping, becoming intensely personal. "You didn't build anything, Jonathan. You were the auctioneer. I was the artist. You sold the paintings. I bled the paint onto the canvas. You took the credit for my work, for my father's legacy. You thought I was a silent partner you could control. You thought I was just a name. But you forgot something." She took a step closer, her eyes boring into his. "My name is on the building. My name is on the box. And my name is on every single share that gives you the power you so arrogantly flaunt. You are an employee, Jonathan, and your performance review is long overdue." The finality of Catherine's words hung in the air like the silence after a lightning strike. The illusion of Jonathan Davenport, the master of the universe, the charismatic CEO, had been utterly and irrevocably shattered. He was left exposed, a common thief and an adulterer, stripped of his power and prestige in front of the very audience he had sought to impress. The room, which had been buzzing with whispers, fell into a profound, uncomfortable quiet. The only sound was the distant clatter of a dropped fork from the kitchen. No one dared to speak. They were witnesses to a complete and total annihilation, executed with the cold precision of a surgeon. Jonathan's face cycled through a series of emotions: rage, denial, fear, and finally, a pathetic, pleading desperation. "Catherine, please," he whispered, the sound pathetic in the vast silence. "Not here. We can fix this." "There is nothing to fix," Catherine stated flatly. Her gaze was unflinching. "You broke it. And I don't repair broken things, Jonathan. I melt them down and create something new." It was then that Penelope made her move. With trembling hands, she reached up to her ear, unhooking a pair of diamond earrings, a gift from Jonathan last month. She placed them quietly on the table. Then she slipped off a delicate diamond bracelet, a birthday present. It joined the earrings. Her movements were jerky, frantic. She was shedding the gilded skin he had given her, desperate to distance herself from his toxicity, from the impending wreckage. Finally, she looked at the Star of Serenity, still in its box in Jonathan's hand. She wouldn't even touch it. She looked at Jonathan, her face a mask of revulsion and betrayal. "You used me," she said, her voice thick with tears. "You told me she was nobody. You told me this was our future. It was. It is," Jonathan pleaded, turning to her. But his words were hollow. "No," Penelope said, shaking her head as she backed away from the table. "This is your mess. I want no part of it." With a final, mortified glance at Catherine, she turned and fled, weaving through the tables of stunned onlookers and disappearing out the front door, her emerald dress a streak of colour vanishing into the night. She left her glass of champagne, her half-eaten meal, and her entire fantasy life behind on the table. Jonathan was now truly alone. He stood, a pariah at his own party, clutching the multi-million-dollar ring that had become a symbol of his ruin. He turned his fury back to Catherine. You think you can just waltz in here and ruin me? I am the CEO of Reyes Jewels. I have contracts. I have a board. About that, Catherine interrupted smoothly. As the majority shareholder, holding 75% of the voting stock, which I inherited directly from my father, and which our prenuptial agreement, which you called a mere formality, keeps securely in my name, I have the authority to call an emergency session of the board. In fact, I did so an hour ago, via a secure video conference. Sam held up a tablet again. This time, it showed the faces of the 4 other board members in a live video call, each looking grim and resolute. They've all seen the preliminary evidence of your financial malfeasance, Jonathan, Catherine continued, her tone chillingly professional. They've seen the unauthorized transfer logs. They've also been made aware of the blatant misuse of company assets for personal gain, which constitutes a severe breach of your fiduciary duty and your employment contract. As of 5 minutes ago, the board voted unanimously. Your position as CEO of Reyes Jewels is terminated, effective immediately. Your corporate accounts have been frozen. The security codes to your office have been changed. The locks on our home will be changed within the hour. 2 large, imposing men in dark suits who had entered the restaurant discreetly a few moments earlier now stepped forward. They were not restaurant security. They had the hard, professional look of a private corporate security detail. Sam had summoned them. "These gentlemen will escort you off the premises," Catherine said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "Your personal effects from the office will be couriered to a location of your choosing. You are no longer welcome in any Reyes Jewels establishment. You are no longer welcome in my life." One of the security men gently but firmly took the velvet box from Jonathan's nerveless grasp and handed it to Catherine. She accepted it without a word. Jonathan stared at her, his mouth agape. He was defeated. He had no moves left to make. The empire he had boasted of building had cast him out. The woman he had dismissed as a fragile artist had checkmated him in public. He was nothing. As the security guards flanked him and began to lead him towards the exit, he shot one last, venomous look at Catherine. "You'll be nothing without me. You'll run it into the ground." Catherine simply watched him go, her expression serene. The crowd parted as the disgraced CEO was escorted out like a common criminal. When the door swung shut behind him, a collective breath was released. The performance was over. Catherine stood for a moment, the velvet box in her hand. Then she turned to the stunned room. She looked directly at Mr. Bartholomew, who raised his wine glass in a silent, respectful toast. Catherine gave him a slight, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. Then she addressed the room. "My apologies for the interruption," she said, her voice calm and strong. "Please enjoy your evening. And don't forget to give generously to the Gems of the City Fund. The arts are a worthy investment." With that, she turned, and with Sam at her side, she walked out of the restaurant, leaving behind the wreckage of her old life to step into the dawn of her new one. 6 months later, the air in the Reyes Jewels flagship store on Fifth Avenue was electric. The scandal at La Lanterne d'Or had become the stuff of New York legend, a tale of corporate intrigue and personal justice that had paradoxically been the best publicity the brand could have ever hoped for. The story wasn't just about a cheating husband. It was about the quiet, brilliant woman who had reclaimed her throne. Catherine Reyes was no longer the reclusive artist behind the brand. She was its fierce, celebrated heart. The store was packed for the unveiling of her newest collection, the Phoenix. It was her first solo collection as both Chief Creative Officer and CEO, and the industry was watching with bated breath. They were not disappointed. The pieces were bold, innovative, and deeply personal, They spoke of fire, of rebirth, of strength forged in adversity. Critics raved, calling it her masterwork. Sales had skyrocketed. Catherine had not just saved her company from her husband, she had made it more successful than ever. Jonathan Davenport had faded into obscurity. Mired in lawsuits and facing federal fraud charges, he had become a social and professional pariah. His name was a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. Penelope Vance had reportedly moved back to Ohio, her New York ambitions reduced to ash. In her private workshop, the one place that had always been her sanctuary, Catherine stood before her workbench. The chaos of the past few months had settled, and she was left with a profound sense of peace and purpose. Sam came in, holding 2 flutes of champagne. "To the Phoenix," Sam said, handing Catherine a glass. "We've already sold out of the centerpiece necklace. A Saudi princess bought it over the phone." Catherine smiled, a genuine, untroubled smile. "To the Phoenix," she echoed, clinking her glass against Sam's. "And to good friends who bring you champagne and help you stage corporate coups." They both laughed, a warm, easy sound. After Sam left, Catherine turned her attention to a velvet tray on her bench. On it lay the Star of Serenity. For months, she hadn't been able to look at it. It was a monument to her pain, a symbol of the deepest betrayal. She had considered selling it, breaking it down, locking it away forever. But that would be letting Jonathan win. It would mean he had succeeded in tainting it. Her father had taught her that every stone has a story. This stone's story had taken a dark turn, but she was the author, and she could write a new chapter. With the careful, practiced hands of a master, she began to work. She removed the magnificent blue diamond from its setting, the platinum band, the one meant to symbolize their intertwined lives, she placed into a crucible. She turned up the flame of her torch and watched as the metal that represented 19 years of lies softened, glowed, and melted into a formless, liquid silver pool. It was a catharsis. She spent the next few weeks redesigning. She took the 19 smaller diamonds, the ones that had marked each year of their marriage, and set them into a new piece. A magnificent brooch in the shape of a rising phoenix, its wings spread wide. It was a gift for Sam, a thank you for her unwavering loyalty. The Star of Serenity diamond itself she set into a new, singular piece. Not a ring to be given by a man, but a pendant. The design was simple, powerful, and utterly modern. The diamond was now the heart of a stylized star, its platinum points sharp and clean. It was no longer a symbol of a partnership, but a declaration of a single, brilliant entity. It was a symbol of her own light, her own resilience. It was no longer the Star of Serenity. She renamed it the Polaris, the North Star, constant, true, and a guide for one's own journey. She clasped the finished pendant around her own neck. It lay cool against her skin. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, not at a woman who had survived, but at a woman who had triumphed. The pain was a part of her story, a facet that had been cut into her, but it no longer defined her. It had simply added to her brilliance. Her legacy was not just her father's, and it was certainly not Jonathan's. It was hers, reclaimed and reforged in fire. And as the blue diamond on her chest caught the light, it sparkled with the promise of a future that was entirely and beautifully her own. A year had passed since the night at La Lanterne d'Or, a year of rebuilding, not just a company, but a life. The penthouse, once a monument to a shared and hollow success, was now entirely Catherine's. She had stripped it of Jonathan's heavy, masculine aesthetic, replacing dark woods and somber leathers with clean lines, soft textures, and an abundance of light. It was no longer a showroom but a home, filled with art that inspired her and silence that comforted her. One cool autumn evening, as a gentle rain whispered against the vast floor-to-ceiling windows, Catherine was reviewing the preliminary sketches for the next spring collection. The Polaris pendant, her personal emblem of victory, lay against her silk blouse, a familiar, cool weight. Her work was her joy now, unburdened by the need to please or accommodate anyone but her own creative vision. The company was stronger than ever, its narrative of authenticity and female strength resonating with a new generation of clients. The intercom buzzed, a harsh intrusion into the tranquility. She frowned, not expecting anyone. It was Wesley, the stern but protective doorman who had worked in the building for 2 decades. "Mrs. Reyes," his voice was strained, apologetic. "I am so sorry to disturb you. There is a man here, a Mr. Davenport. He is asking to see you. I told him you are not accepting visitors, but he is insistent." Catherine's blood ran cold for a single, fleeting moment. Jonathan. The name felt alien, a relic from a past life. She hadn't seen or heard from him since his unceremonious exit from the restaurant. His lawyers had communicated with hers, a sterile and bitter exchange that had finalized their divorce and settled the criminal charges with a plea deal that involved hefty fines and a permanent ban from the financial industry. He had, for all intents and purposes, ceased to exist in her world. "Wesley, you know my instructions," she said, her voice steady. "Yes, ma'am. I do. But he says it is a matter of life and death. He looks unwell, Mrs. Reyes. I would not have called otherwise." A part of her, the logical, self-protective part championed by Sam, screamed to refuse, to have Wesley call security and have him removed. But another, deeper part of her felt a strange sense of obligation, not to him, but to the woman she was now. A queen does not hide from ghosts. She faces them, and by facing them, banishes them from her kingdom for good. This was the final piece of unfinished business. "It's all right, Wesley," she said, her decision made. "Send him up." A few minutes later, the chime of the private elevator announced his arrival. Catherine stood in the center of her living room, her posture perfect, her expression unreadable. When the doors slid open, the man who stepped out was a grotesque caricature of the Jonathan she had known. The impeccable Tom Ford suits were gone, replaced by a rumpled, ill-fitting blazer. His face was gaunt, his skin had a pasty, unhealthy pallor, and the confident gleam in his eyes had been replaced by a haunted, desperate flicker. He was a man hollowed out from the inside, the architecture of his arrogance having collapsed, leaving only a ruin. He stopped, taking in the transformed apartment. "You've changed the place," he murmured, his voice raspy. "I have," Catherine replied, her tone neutral. "What do you want, Jonathan?" He took a hesitant step forward, his eyes pleading. "Catherine, I know I have no right to be here. I know I am the last person on earth you want to see." He wrung his hands, a nervous, pathetic gesture. "But I had to see you. To tell you I am sorry." Catherine remained silent, her expression unchanging. She had learned that a man like Jonathan only ever used the word sorry as a key to unlock a door he wanted to walk through. He seemed to take her silence as an invitation to continue. "I was a fool, Cat, a blind, arrogant fool. I had everything. We had everything. I let my ego, this chase for more, I let it poison me. And that woman, Penelope, she was nothing. A symptom of the disease, not the cause. A mistake. A terrible, meaningless mistake. He was trying to weave a narrative of a good man who had lost his way, hoping to appeal to a well of sympathy he assumed must still exist. He had always underestimated her. "I'm ruined, Catherine," he said, his voice cracking. "My reputation, my career, it's all gone. I have nothing. I needed to look you in the eye and tell you that I know what I lost. I lost you." Catherine finally spoke, her voice as calm and clear as the rain against the window. "What you lost, Jonathan, was a source of income. You lost a brand you could take credit for. You lost a wife who was convenient and quiet. You never had me. Not really. Because to have someone, you have to see them. And you never saw me. You saw a name, a legacy, an asset. You saw a walking, talking vault of intellectual property you could exploit." He flinched as if she had slapped him. "That's not true." "Isn't it?" she countered, taking a small step forward. "Your apology isn't about the pain you caused me. It's about the consequences you are suffering. You're not sorry for the betrayal. You're sorry you got caught. You're not here for my forgiveness. You're here for some kind of absolution so you can sleep at night. Or perhaps you're here for a handout." His desperate eyes gave him away. That was the core of it. He was broken, and he had come back to the person he had broken, hoping she had a spare part for him. "I don't hate you, Jonathan," she said, and the words surprised him. They surprised her a little, too. Hate requires passion. It requires energy. And you are no longer worth my energy. When I look at you, I don't feel anger. I feel a profound pity. You had a seat at a banquet, and you chose to steal the silverware instead. You'll never understand what you truly threw away. She walked to the door of the apartment and held it open, a clear, final gesture. He looked at her, at the magnificent apartment, at the glittering city beyond the windows, a world he was no longer a part of. He saw the Polaris pendant at her throat, a stone he had tried to steal, now worn as her personal badge of honor. He saw a woman he had never known, a woman forged into steel in the fire he had set. Defeated, he shuffled past her without another word and stepped back into the elevator. Catherine watched as the doors slid shut, sealing him away. She closed the door to her home, the click of the latch echoing in the quiet room. It was the sound of the final sentence, of the final chapter of a long and painful book. She did not feel triumphant. She did not feel sad. She felt light. The last echo of the lie was gone. The ghost was banished. She walked back to the window, looking down at the endless tapestry of lights that was New York City. It was her city, her business, her life. And for the first time, with no shadows of the past lurking at her door, it was entirely and completely hers to command. That night at the restaurant wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the birth of an icon. Catherine Reyes reminded us that a person's true worth is never defined by someone else's betrayal. It's defined by how they rise from the ashes. Jonathan thought he was taking everything from her, but he only succeeded in giving her back the one thing he had stolen over the years, her own power. Her story is a powerful testament to the fact that sometimes the most devastating moments of our lives are just setting the stage for our greatest comeback. What did you think of Catherine's ultimate power move? Could you have been as calm and calculated as she was? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by this story of justice and empowerment, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that will leave you breathless. Thank you for listening.